By definition, a miracle is the supernatural intervening in the laws of nature to allow for some event to occur that would not naturally happen. And I don't think that's ever happened in the history of mankind, nor do I think it ever will happen. Prove me wrong.
Sure, here's one case. The facts of this case are confirmed by the multiple doctors that treated this person, Barbara Snyder. There are numerous independent witnesses to her condition, and we have years of medical records. In fact, two of the doctors were actually so astonished by her case that they wrote about this in books. She was diagnosed with progressive multiple sclerosis, which was confirmed through spinal taps and other diagnostic tests. After being thoroughly examined, doctors at the Mayo Clinic agreed with her diagnosis. She spent months in hospitals, often for pneumonia, after being unable to breathe. One diaphragm was paralyzed, rendering a lung non-functional. The other lung operated at less than 50%. A tracheostomy tube was inserted into her neck with oxygen pumped from canisters in the garage. She lost control of her urination and bowels. A catheter was inserted into her bladder, and an ileostomy was performed with a bag attached to her for bodily waste. She also went legally blind, unable to read, and only capable of seeing objects as gray shadows. Dr. Thomas Marshall says a few things about her case. At times, the disease seemed to become inactive, a common occurrence in multiple sclerosis, with relapses and remissions, but she never improved. She would get through a crisis and then stabilize on a plateau that was lower than her last remissions. She was confined to a bed, her body twisted like a pretzel into a fetal position. Her hands were permanently flexed to the point that her fingernails nearly touched her wrists. Her feet were locked in a downward position. Marshall says, as Barb became progressively more disabled by her MS, she elected to enroll in hospice. To qualify for this compassionate home nursing program, her life expectancy needed to be less than 6 months. I don't think this was an exaggeration. One day, someone called in Barbara's story to the radio station of the Moody Bible Institute in Chicago, and some 450 Christians wrote letters to her church saying they were lifting up a prayer for Barbara. In 1981, her aunt came over to read her some of the letters in which people offered the prayers for healing. Here, Dr. Marshall recounts the story. In the early afternoon, two girlfriends came to visit after the church. Barb became weary with all the attention and was quiet, while the girls made small talk. When there was a lull in the conversation, a man's voice spoke from behind Barb, but there was no man in the room. I don't know what you're going to think about this, she announced, but God just told me to get up and walk. Her friends suddenly became very quiet. I know he really did, Barb insisted. Run and get my family. I want them here with us. Her friends, recognizing the urgency in Barb's voice, bounded to the doorway to yell for her family. Come quick, come quick. Barb felt compelled to do immediately what she was divinely instructed. So she literally jumped out of the bed and removed her oxygen. She was standing on the legs that had not supported her for years. Her vision was back and she was no longer short of breath, even without her oxygen. Her contractions were gone and she could move her feet and hands freely. As she walked out of the room, she was first met by her mother, who immediately dropped to her knees and felt Barb's calves. You have muscles again, she yelled. Her father came running in next, hugged Barb, and whisked her off for a waltz around the family room. The next day, Barbara came to Marshall's office for an examination. He told her that this is medically impossible. A chest x-ray that afternoon showed her lungs were already perfectly normal, with a collapsed lung completely expanded. The intestine that had been vented to the abdominal wall was reconnected normally. Barbara has now lived for 35 years with no recurrence of her illness. Both physicians marvel at her extraordinary recovery. I have never witnessed anything like this before or since considered it a rare privilege to observe the hand of God performing a true miracle, Dr. Marshall says. You can't make out the words here, but here is the medical report signed by Dr. Adolph. In it, he writes, the patient now has none of the findings of multiple sclerosis, is walking normally, has the tracheostomy tube out, and no pulmonary problems. Please see the extensive charts. At the present time, the patient has no findings of MS and walks normally and speaks normally. A colleague of mine even reached out to Dr. Joe Bergeron, a specialist on paralysis and physical therapy, about this case, and he explained that the speed of recovery is not physically possible. Now, if we need to talk about epistemology and methodology as to why we should affirm that this is a genuine miracle versus its negation, that's a different video. This is a miracle account that I find very compelling, and there's many like it.